Okay, great. Well, welcome everyone. It's great having you join us today. My name is Laura Shrake, and on behalf of the Council of the Great Lakes Region, it is my pleasure to welcome you to our Business and Sustainability webinar series. Today, we have a thought-provoking and information-packed webinar for you. We are going to hear from thought leader, author, and executive John Stackhouse, who will share with us perspectives on topics impacting the globe and what they mean for the binational Great Lakes region. We are so fortunate to have John with us today to share his perspective and insight on a wide range of issues, from innovation and disruption, climate change and energy, to economic and social prosperity. This is going to be a really interesting hour for all of us. We will have some time at the end for questions, so do listen closely. We're going to cover a lot, and please put forward any questions you have in the Zoom Q&A box. Before John dives in with his talk, however, I want to kick us off, as I usually do, by giving some context to the region and introducing the Council of the Great Lakes region to those who might be new to us. When speaking about the Great Lakes region, we are typically referring to the economic region, which covers a span of 8 US states from Minnesota to New York, and the 2 Canadian provinces of Ontario and Quebec. This region is home to 107 million people, and it is the economic engine of North America. To put it into perspective, based on economic output, if the Great Lakes region was a country, it would be the 3rd largest economy in the world. It holds major industries such as manufacturing, agriculture, energy, shipping, to name a few. And the region provides 51 million jobs, which is equivalent to about 1/3 of the combined American and Canadian workforce. In addition to the region's economic prominence, it is also environmentally significant. The Great Lakes region is guardian to one of the largest surface freshwater systems in the world. It holds roughly 20% of Earth's surface freshwater and 84% of North America's. So just one of the many important reasons we need to be working collectively and collaboratively to protect the health of the watershed and its ecosystem. The 5 Great Lakes provide a drinking water source for over 40 million people in the US and Canada, and the lakes and their watersheds support more than 3,500 plant and animal species. Supporting the region's economic strength and environmental sustainability is key for the long-term success of both the US and Canada, and that's the foundation of the work of the Council of the Great Lakes region. So understanding the significance of this region that we are so lucky to live and work in, the Council of the Great Lakes region is committed to finding solutions for socioeconomic and environmental issues facing the North American Great Lakes. As a binational network of organizations, we do this by convening and connecting the diverse perspectives and interests. We're working across borders and sectors to create action and a united voice on pressing regional issues. And as part of these efforts, we are building a regional business and sustainability network, aiming to engage companies and business leaders in critical conversations like this about protecting the Great Lakes environment while supporting the region's economic growth. This network development is thanks to funding from the Fred A. and Barbara M. Erb Family Foundation. And as a network of not-for-profit organizations, the Council's work is possible thanks to the support we receive from our generous funders and partners like the Erb Family Foundation. Our partners span across all stakeholder groups, and together with a sense of urgency, we are advancing priorities and the projects that are necessary for a sustainable region. We know that no one level of government or sector has the power, the know-how, or the investment necessary to solve the region's challenges on their own. And that's why we've created multi-sector and multi-stakeholder programs. Our focus areas are issues critical to the region, like circular economy, where we are working to forge a future without waste in the Great Lakes, starting with plastics. Water stewardship, where we are deepening information exchange on water stewardship best practices. Decarbonization, where we are collaborating to create measurable long-term impact in reducing emissions in the region. And sustainable food systems, where we are initiating dialogues on sustainable food production in the region. And we can expect to hear from our speaker today on several critical issue areas. So with that, it is now my sincere pleasure to introduce our featured speaker, John Stackhouse. John is a nationally best-selling author and one of Canada's leading voices on innovation and economic disruption. He is a senior fellow at the C.D. Howe Institute and the Monk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy, and sits on the board of the Aga Khan Foundation of Canada. John is also senior vice president in the office of the CEO at Royal Bank of Canada, leading the organization's research and thought leadership on economic, technological, and social change. Just a reminder, we will have a Q&A session after John's talk. So if you have any questions, please do enter them in the Zoom Q&A box. And if I can request the Zoom Q&A box to be used instead of the chat box, that will be really helpful for me to track the questions as they come in. So thank you. And John, thank you so much for being here. I will now hand it over to you.
Laura, it's great to be with you all this morning, and thank you so much for including me. I guess I should start with that inevitable question. Can you hear me? I'm going to make sure I'm not muted or otherwise inaudible.
Yes, I can hear you.
Great. You'd think 2 years of training had made us perfectionists at this, but I find it still can be a daily struggle. This is a great day to be having this conversation, and I'll get to your impeccable timing, Laura, in a minute. But wanted to reflect on a couple of things that you mentioned in the introduction. First is the importance of water to this region, and we just marked World Water Day this week, and that got me thinking about the enormous water resources that we have. In fact, we're here because we're part of one of the world's great freshwater basins, and should never forget that. And that will be important to what I'm going to talk about, which is climate smart economic growth, and how this naturally endowed part of the world with better natural water resources than anywhere else on Earth, as well as better human capital resources than most places on Earth, can really lead not just the continent but the world in terms of the transition to a net zero economy and a more biodiverse minded economy. The second point that you made, Laura, that I thought was worth reflecting on more is that this is the third largest economic region in the world. We do a lot as a bank in California because we own a significant bank there, and spend a lot of time listening to Californians tell us about them being the fifth largest economy of the world, or sixth, depending on how you count things. And that's fantastic. We're very bullish on California and the United States in general. But we should also remind ourselves that the Great Lakes region is an economic powerhouse, and that will connect with that point I wanted to stress off the beginning, is how do we take this naturally endowed, humanity-rich basin and ensure that it is leading the continent and the world in the most exciting economic transition that we certainly will see in our lifetimes. And in many ways, that conversation is front and center today. So congratulations, Laura, on your impeccable timing. Joe Biden will be landing in Ottawa, his first visit as U.S. president, and an important series of conversations between him and Prime Minister Trudeau, but also between the administration and the federal government about many of the topics that are central to this conversation. One of the signals that we are hearing from the Biden administration and from America generally is that it is game on in terms of the economic transition towards net zero. And what the U.S. is now rolling out through the Inflation Reduction Act and other significant measures are real game changers to economic development and economic policy. And we are going to see a series of responses in Canada in the coming days. Today with the Ontario budget, which needs to, in our view, start to reposition and up Ontario's game in this new economic order. And then secondly, next week in the federal budget, where we will see, we think, significant commitments in IRA, so-called IRA response policies to help position Canada more robustly in partnership with the United States for a new economic era. In some ways, I think this must be what 1950-ish was like in the continent, when the United States and Canada really came together to lay the foundations for a post-war industrial economy that was like no other for many decades, and this region was the hub and the heart of that. We're seeing in very similar, albeit different ways, a laying of a new economic foundation for a climate-smart economy that Canada and the U.S. can help build and rival anything else going on in the world. When we look at the opportunities here, and we're looking for opportunities around the globe every day, we keep coming home because of all the attributes, Laura, that you mentioned and that this group knows. More than 50% of U.S.-Canadian bilateral border trade is in this region. It's one of the reasons we're bullish on our backyard. 30% of Canada-U.S. economic activity happens in this region. Again, why we're bullish on our backyard as well as other backyards. But we see this as being a great center of opportunity. And as we look towards the coming decades, and many challenges in getting towards net zero, many challenges in rewiring our economy, our communities, our neighborhoods in ways that are not only climate friendly, but climate smart. We think this region can be the leader for North America as well as the world. And there's no reason this region can't be the low emissions industrial heartland, once again, of North America and indeed the world. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen automatically. So I want to share some thoughts today based on the research we've been doing at RBC on what Canada can do, but also what neighbors in this amazing economic relationship can do together, along with government, to accelerate that transition. So it will start with budget commitments, as I mentioned, and we're anticipating the federal budget to lay down significant amounts of money in the billions of dollars in IRA response commitments. We put out a report this week from our RBC Economics estimating that Canada needs about $12 billion a year in public commitments to match what IRA is doing. But as our paper lays out, we need to be far more strategic than just throwing money on the table. We can't compete dollar for dollar with the United States. No one can. But we can certainly take advantage using Canada's strengths, both in technology and natural resources, and particularly in human capital, to leverage what we can invest, both publicly and privately, but also through trade and investment to take advantages in cross-border activities with what's starting to accelerate in the U.S. So how do we go about that strategic approach to this climate transition and not get into an arms race, as some have called it, of climate subsidies? Well, we need to think strategically about the climate transition and think strategically as partners. And we're really excited about the Biden visit, that this will be the strengthening of the world's best partnership, best economic and political partnership in the world, strengthening that partnership for the climate transition. This is not about a rivalry between Canada and the US. It's about what we can do together. We have to start by seeing climate as an enabler. IRA is going to drive competition. We're already seeing that competition for capital, competition for technology, competition for skills and human capital. But climate, more than a competitive driver, is also an enabler and offers enormous potential to drive synergies around things like hydrogen, renewables, and electricity, all strengths in the Great Lakes region. How do we work in a cross-border way to take advantage of what both regions and both countries can do to ensure that we're benefiting from each other, enabling each other to get to where neither of us would get on our own? That's the strength of partnership. IRA is laying the foundation for new emissions-free sectors and new investments in emissions-conscious industries. That's going to lead to IP development, export potential, and the ability to capture new economic opportunities. How do we do that in partnership? We're competing, and many of the firms that we work with are active competitors, but ultimately we want to be growing the proverbial pie, and we think climate can be an enabler for that. Secondly, how do we lean into strategic advantages? In the wake of IRA, we can prioritize high-value economic opportunities and activities. And we think there are 4 sectors in this region that are really interesting to look at and to work with in terms of the climate transition, because they can lead this new era of economic growth, another 25 years of economic growth if we lay the foundations today that will get us towards net zero. Number one, and this isn't going to be a surprise to people on this call, is automotive. This region has a legacy of automotive leadership that is pretty much unparalleled in the world, and certainly unparalleled in terms of the free flow of trade that the Auto Pact helped create. How do we help governments think about modernizing what we have done with trade? We've seen the opportunities with the emergence of the EV and battery supply chain. We're seeing what Ontario is able to do, whether it's the Stellantis plant or the Volkswagen commitment for its battery plant. But we're also seeing risks, as we saw in the first iteration of IRA, where Canada could intentionally or unintentionally be left out, or at least face a higher barrier to entry into a market that we've had just tremendous mutual benefits through the free flow of trade. How do we ensure that the new EV and battery supply chains that are going to power the transition to a net zero economy are as open and free flowing as we've seen over the last 50 years in traditional automotive trade? We have to start by recognizing that the automobile and the components of the future are going to be different. There is going to be more software, a lot more software in the cars of the future and in the batteries of the future. There are going to be fewer parts than we've seen in traditional automobiles. But there's also going to be a more sophisticated supply chain required, especially as it connects quite literally with your houses, with your offices, and with your neighborhoods. How do we ensure that the dynamic market and private sector of this region can lead us and frankly lead the world, not lead that to Europe or East Asia? We need to lead the world in the EV revolution. Canada and Ontario particularly, but Quebec as well, need to be a significant part of that. That will require an ongoing assessment of our trade agreements, CUSMA or USMCA in particular, to ensure that they are fit for purpose as the economy transitions, as new ideas, new products, new ways of doing business evolve. Let's ensure that our trade agreements and trade practices do not become an inhibitor to the innovation that this region is going to need to do what other parts of the world that I mentioned are also wanting to do. Let's ensure that we're both competing for that first place prize in the EV revolution. The talent, the capital, and the trade capabilities are in this region, but we can't take them for granted. Secondly, and connected to that, is electricity. Let's set our sights on becoming the green electricity hub for North America. There's amazing electricity capabilities right around the Great Lakes. We see this here in Ontario and Quebec, but also see it very actively in Ohio, New York, Michigan, and on. How do we ensure that electricity innovation in the Great Lakes region is as ambitious and as effective as electricity innovation going on anywhere else in the world? And this is going to have to span from generation to distribution, transmission to usage. And we have a role, we as a region have a leadership role to play in all of those. How can we work more cooperatively to ensure that the next generation of nuclear power development, the next generation of renewables, and by renewables, I'm thinking specifically of wind and solar. How do we ensure that the next generations of stored hydro and battery storage, large scale battery storage, are being developed in this region and being developed in partnership? We have tremendous brain power and capacity in each of our jurisdictions. I'm speaking to you today from Ontario, but we need to ensure that we are collaborating across borders and across boundaries to do what other regions in the world are also racing to do. We can claim first prize in that if we work together, if we share in a trade-minded way the best of our ideas, the best of our IP, the best of our talent, but also find novel ways to share electricity. As demand and needs grow for electricity, we're estimating in Canada, we're going to have to double at least the available supply over the next quarter century. I suspect it's the same on the U.S. side of the border. How do we ensure that we're working together to climb that very serious mountain? And then how do we ensure that we're sharing best practices and selling best practices to each other in terms of the last mile of electricity, whether it's to how we wire our homes for the future, how we plug in our cars and vehicles for the future, how we transport goods in the future. If we do that together, we're going to do it faster, better, smarter, and more profitably than is going to happen anywhere else in the world. Third sector that we're very excited about, we think has a tremendous opportunity in the Great Lakes region, is agriculture. The world often does not think of this region as a big agriculture hub. It is. There's a tremendous amount of food and a diversity of food grown and exported across our bridges and waterways. We need to continue to do that and do that more as we embrace climate smart agriculture. We've been advocating for Canada to produce and export more food with fewer emissions. We know the world is going to need more food. We know that our neighbors are going to need more food and cheaper food in the years ahead. How do we do that with fewer emissions? This is the great moonshot opportunity for us here in Canada as a significant global exporter of food. But I'd suggest that it's also a tremendous opportunity for our Great Lakes neighbors. And how do we find ways to do this both in competition with each other, but also in collaboration with each other? And this is collaboration, again, through trade, our number one asset as neighbors. How do we continue to trade food across our border, buy and sell each other's food, especially as we work towards more climate smart food? How do we ensure that our trade agreements do not become intended or unintended barriers to the shipping and trading of food across our borders? How do we collaborate on research to ensure that the great universities of our region are developing more and more sophisticated ways to grow, ship, and consume and dispose of food in climate smart ways? Again, what we're seeing coming out of Washington is very inspiring. And what we see the USDA doing is both impressive and challenging to us as a country, because we have to up our game too on that front and ensure that we as trading partners, and as kitchen table partners as much as we are, and as visitors to each other's restaurants and grocery stores on a daily basis, are not just developing but consuming and regulating food in a collaborative way that allows this region to innovate and lead the world in climate smart agriculture. That's going to take, as I mentioned, a level of collaboration between private sector firms as well as cooperation, including research and development, a collaboration with our universities and colleges for smarter and smarter research and development, and collaboration with our regulators and government agencies to ensure that as we develop more and more climate smart food, that our regulations are also evolving at pace. The fourth sector I wanted to touch on today is buildings, which we see as also a significant contributor to our net zero journey. And again, a field that has enormous both tradition and potential for cross-border collaboration. When we look at, and talk to our developer clients, some of them household names around the world, whether it's Brookfield or Elliston or Mattamy Homes here in Ontario, all very active and ambitious in the United States, given the opportunities there. How do we ensure that our great relationship between countries centered in this region allows this region to become the global center of climate smart buildings? How do we ensure that the shopping malls, the office towers, the hockey rinks, and the neighborhoods of the future are prototyped, developed, and scaled here in the Great Lakes region for a net zero economy and a net zero society? The technologies are already emerging in this region. We need to ensure that they're adapted, scaled, and regulated in a very efficient, coordinated manner across our boundaries to ensure that the enormous potential that Laura mentioned in the beginning of this economy is utilized for that net zero transition. So those are a few thoughts on what we can work on together. And I want to wrap up with some thoughts on what our two countries can think towards, and then also how RBC sees our role in this conversation and how we can work with you on some of these really exciting opportunities. Well, three big thoughts for our countries to think about. And I'm not sure if this will be on the Biden-Trudeau agenda or not, but it's up to all of us to keep these front of mind. First of all, is advanced supply chains. We know the Biden administration's ambition on this front. We know what the Trudeau government federally and the Ford government in Ontario and Legault government in Quebec are working towards. How do we ensure that advanced supply chains are as seamless, efficient, and effective in this new economic order as they have been over the last 50 years? We think it would be diminishing for the United States to seal off the enormous cross-border opportunities for Canada to be an integrated part of these great supply chains of the future. So let's ensure that we're working together. EVs is the most obvious example that I spoke about, but it speaks to all sorts of dynamic economic sectors that we need to ensure that as they are transforming, we're doing this in a coordinated, collaborative way that appreciates there are no stronger supply chains in the world, no more resilient supply chains in the world than Canada-US supply chains. Let's ensure that the learnings and the spirit of that carries into the new economic order. Secondly is the sharing of natural resources. As we look towards a net zero economy and a climate smart economy, how do we ensure that we are sharing natural resources, conventional resources, which include oil and gas, as well as new resources and critical minerals are front of mind in ways that are as seamless as they have been over the decades? There are too many local interests that continue to stymie and stagnate the free flow of resources across our borders. We are not going to get to net zero. We're not going to get to net zero separately or together if we are not sharing resources, natural resources across our borders. So ensuring that that is front of mind for policymakers as well as private sector actors and consumers and voters is going to be critical in the years ahead. And then thirdly, how do we enhance the brain power of this region, understanding that we all have different approaches to education, to IP, to private sector research in each of our jurisdictions, but we have much more in common than we have in difference. So how do we ensure that this terrific economic hub, but brain hub, spanning from Chicago to Montreal and beyond, is working together on the greatest scientific and technology challenges of our time, which are going to get us to net zero. The more we do together, the more we'll be able to do for each other's benefit, but also for the world's benefit. And if we don't help the world get to net zero, it's ultimately going to be meaningless what we do in our own backyards, because there is only one global climate. So I hope we can use this forum and other forums to develop those collaborative approaches to innovation, to knowledge sharing, and to continuing to ensure that trade and investment remains as seamless in this region as it has been, or even more so over the next 50 years than it's been over the last 50, and shows the world, and it's a more divided world, shows that divided world what cooperation in a free market, democratic environment can do in terms of getting us to net zero. So where does RBC play a role in all of this? Well, we see and hear from our clients every day that we have to be out there helping with these conversations, bringing clients together, informing public policy decisions, and working with our clients to keep that innovative spirit going, ensuring that they have the capital, the business plans, and the opportunities before them. So to help with this, we're launching a climate institute within RBC that will be part of the operation where I work, and is seeking to work actively with groups far and wide on the transition to net zero and the transition to a climate smart economy. Our initial focus is on energy systems. So some of what I talked about on electricity, as well as conventional sources of energy like oil and gas, will be a critical area of focus for us as we continue to research these challenges, but look for ways to bring our clients together to come up with action-oriented solutions that can be done in partnership or in collaboration with governments, but can also help the private sector do things on its own. Secondly, agriculture, to the point I was making. It's 10 to 15% of Canada's emissions, roughly the same, I believe, in the US, is an enormous opportunity for us. So how do we work with our agriculture clients to invest in regenerative agriculture, in soil sequestration, in carbon inset models through the food supply chain? The more we can do that through the private sector, especially across borders, is going to be a really powerful tool for climate smart agriculture in the years ahead. And third is our focus on buildings, as we work with developers, including the ones I mentioned, not only to help them develop net zero operations rooted in net zero buildings and communities, but how do they collaborate as a sector, both here in Canada, but also across borders, to ensure that our policies, regulations, building codes, as well as innovation and technology ecosystems are focused on this enormous opportunity of getting us to net zero. So expect to hear more from RBC in the months and years ahead on these challenges and opportunities, but also please see us as a willing partner with whatever you're doing in these areas. If we can help, or if you can help with what we're doing, this is the ultimate team sport. And we want to be part of the team on this call in helping the Great Lakes region lead North America, and through that lead the world towards a more prosperous and inclusive net zero economy. So Laura, let me wrap up with a thank you once again for including RBC in this conversation. Know that we are excited to be part of this conversation and very interested to hear thoughts, questions, suggestions, and observations as we work on these enormous challenges together.
Great. Thank you so much, John. I really enjoyed how you opened that up with a vision of the region being a leader for North America and the world in terms of climate smart solutions. We certainly share that vision, and we're working alongside you to move that forward. So that was nice to hear. And I also found it interesting, you mentioned the Climate Institute. Did you say that you will be launching it, or it has been launched?
We will be launching it. So I'm giving you, I guess, a sneak peek on that.
And what's the timeline for that?
In a couple of weeks.
Oh, fantastic. Great. So we got the sneak preview. So we have some questions. I want to start first with just sort of on the region. So I mentioned it earlier, you mentioned it, the region is home to top universities, industry, R&D, innovation and manufacturing, including the auto industry. It's the economic powerhouse of North America. And it's also a hub for jobs and for innovation. Can you expand on what types of collaborations you see are needed to ensure that the region remains to be this hub, and what kind of opportunities are necessary?
Great question. And I'd enjoy hearing other thoughts from the group on this, either in this conversation or separately. We have some of the world's best universities in the Great Lakes region, and governments as well as private sector actors and citizens need to invest more in those universities to ensure that they are the research leaders that we will need over the next 25 years. All the ideas and innovations that we're going to need to get to net zero are somehow connected to universities and knowledge centers. So let's invest knowing that. We need to be more ambitious as a private sector, and probably Canadians need to be more ambitious as a private sector in terms of leveraging research from universities, but also collaborating on research, and particularly across borders. So how do some of the great companies in our backyard here in Ontario or Quebec think about ways of being part of collaborative research efforts with the great regions, and kind of forget about borders for a moment, knowing that whatever solutions we develop for net zero agriculture or climate smart buildings are quickly going to be applied across borders, because we have so much similar geography as well as cultures and economies. So we see bits of that, and the auto sector actually is a really good example of that, but we need to see more of that in food systems. We need to see more of that in building systems, and we'd be happy to be a partner in what's going on there. So collaborative and applied research would be, let me rephrase that, collaborative applied cross-border research would be a good ambition for us.
Great. And what do you see as the role of business in this sustainability conversation? We see a lot of businesses starting to acknowledge the climate crisis, and they're putting forward sustainability commitments. What do you see as the role of business in sustainability?
Well, business is going to be playing more and more of a leading role. Many businesses, many of our clients, and us included, see this as a fantastic economic opportunity. If we believe that the transition to a net zero economy is almost the equivalent of the creation of the industrial economy, as I mentioned, in the late 1940s, early 1950s. What a great moment to be in business. For us, what a great moment to be financing clients who have that ambition. How do we share our experiences and best practices in a cross-border way is going to be really important. We're doing this as a bank through something called the Net Zero Banking Alliance, which is a global group of banks working towards net zero, but particularly focused on disclosure of what's called financed emissions. So emissions connected or attributed to our essentially our lending book. We are working as a region within that global group with American banks on best practices, because capital markets are kind of are very similar in North America and less similar to Europe and Asia. So how do we learn from each other, share approaches to data in a non-collusive way, but learn from each other? We see the same opportunity in the building sector, in the agriculture sector. So if I'm a food producer or a food retailer and need to account for my scope 1, 2, or 3 emissions, that's a nascent kind of a nascent requirement for businesses, and they can learn as much cross-border as they can learn within a jurisdiction. So I think there's an enormous opportunity for cross-border learning between businesses.
Absolutely. And that's with many of the programs that the Council of the Great Lakes region has formed. They are cross-border, and we're bringing together businesses from Canada and the U.S. to work together on identifying solutions and initiating some on-the-ground projects. I'm going to move to some of the audience questions, because we've got quite a few that are coming in. This one is from Kat, and she's asking, how do we balance environment and fossil fuels when Biden is investing in projects like Willow, particularly since the world cannot expand on fossil fuels and stay within a 1.5-degree global temperature increase?
Yeah, you've just nailed one of the great challenges of this decade. We are using more fossil fuels as individuals than ever, and that cannot continue. So how do we manage the trajectory in a market, a free market way, and how do we ensure that is somewhat coordinated across borders? Because a lot of things can go sideways if regulations, pricing get too far out of alignment between neighboring jurisdictions. We will need oil and gas for a good number of years, and we need to ensure that we are producing more and more efficient oil and gas and consuming it in more and more efficient ways to reduce the climate impact of that. Secondly, we need to ensure that the resources, the financial resources that we all develop from those activities are directed again in a market-minded way towards the transition and development of newer fuel sources and fuel systems as society transitions. And it's a transition. It's a dial, not a switch, but it needs to be thoughtfully managed as a dial. That includes ensuring investing increasingly, and this is one of the things we like about IRA, is this focus on investment in new technologies and in letting the market scale those, which the United States is better at than any other country in the world. But let's ensure that we are together continuing to turn that dial. That is going to be incredibly important for Canada and the U.S. to work on together, because we are two of the most significant fossil fuel producers and consumers in the world, and among the only democratic producers of significance of oil and gas. There are others, but we'd be among the leaders. So how do we ensure that we are developing those resources, exporting them to the world in more and more efficient ways, and then using the benefits of those to invest in the new energy technologies that we should also be leading the world in the decades ahead.
Great. And let's see, then following question is, what are your thoughts on the Banking on a Better Future campaign that's been created by youth that pledge to not bank with banks that continue to fund fossil fuels?
We talk with a lot of groups about this issue, and particularly our shareholders who have a range of views on that. I don't think there's any serious, significant shareholder out there who wants a bank just to immediately cut off financing. That's not going to solve anything. There's going to be plenty of other capital sources for all that's going on. The real opportunity for us, and this is why we wanted to be part of the Net Zero Banking Alliance, is to work in a very disciplined, methodologically sound, and transparent approach to the transition. RBC can do its own thing, but it's far more powerful for us to be part of, and a significant part of a coalition that's now into the hundreds of financial institutions around the world, developing those methodologies, developing the data systems, which are still very nascent, more so than many might appreciate, that allow us to measure and allow society to measure how we are collectively doing and how our clients are doing, because all we're doing is financing our clients. So we want to use our financed emissions to show how they're doing, and then to understand where progress is being made, or understand why progress may not be made in certain areas. What are the consumer resistances? What are the policy obstacles? What are the market failures that are leading to that? This is this open conversation and assessment of all these variables is going to be really important over the years ahead. To do anything suddenly, and history shows this over and over again, leads to suboptimal and sometimes very damaging outcomes. So we need to be mindful and working with many different actors, including the general public, on this transition, because we're all in this. It's not up to a single actor to make to flip a single switch and suddenly things will change. So we're excited about the work that is going on, and it's complex, sophisticated work, and need to do more of that in the years ahead. And again, this is where the private sector is leading, where governments have fallen short. This is why Mike Bloomberg and Mark Carney created the Global Financial Alliance for Net Zero, that the Net Zero Banking Alliance is part of, because they see the power of the private sector to constructively, progressively lead this transition.
Mm-hmm. Great. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. I'm going to shift to food production now and sustainable agriculture. You've mentioned it, had mentioned it a few times. One of the questions that's come in is asking your thoughts on how we can ensure increased food production is not at the expense of destroying forests, wetlands, and other ecosystems that sequester carbon.
It's a great question, and one for which there is no simple answer. But among the multiple answers that sort of come together as a solution are the 30 by 30 commitment that Canada led at the Biodiversity COP in Montreal. The United States is not a signatory to the Biodiversity Convention, so unfortunately it's not able to be part of the 30 by 30 commitment. This is ensuring that 30% of our land mass is protected. So that's a big commitment, and an ambition that we hope the United States will be part of sooner rather than later. At the more local level, even at the farm level, how do and every farmer I deal with gets this way more than any other group in society. How do we ensure that agriculture practices at the farm level, particularly in the future, incorporate more biodiversity? And how do we reward farmers for that? They get this from almost from birth, but have not been given the economic incentives to do that. So we're trying to, back to the model that we're trying to develop here at RBC. We brought together a range of clients in agriculture, from some of the country's biggest food processors and food retailers to a range of the country's most sophisticated farmers, as well as a lot of people in between, academics, scientists, policymakers among them, in a coalition to work on this sort of challenge literally at the field level, to find and develop new models to reward farmers for sustainable farming practices. Some like to call it regen ag. That is a bit of a trigger word for others. So just climate smart ag practices is how I prefer to describe it. That reward farmers for these practices that we know capture greenhouse gas emissions. There are good economic tools that can reward farmers for that. But it's not just about the soil. It's, to your point, it's about the trees. And that's part of climate smart ag practices. So how do we ensure that farmers who are following those practices, and you find them right across the country, are being economically rewarded for that? Because there's lots of folks out there, and this is where carbon inset and carbon offset models are so powerful, who want to invest in that. So we're going to work with this alliance to develop economic systems and financial systems that allow that transfer of capital to reward the protection of the biodiversity that you're rightly talking to.
Yeah, that system does need to evolve. What would the government's role be in making that happen?
I think there's a good opportunity, back to the importance of this cross-border conversation, because climate is a global challenge, and we've had a global approach to it for good reasons, but that global approach has fallen short. You see it in all the data. We need to maintain those global commitments through things like the Paris agreements in Glasgow and through the COP process. But we also need to think more regionally about climate opportunities. And how do we think in this region, North America generally, but to this conversation, the Great Lakes more particularly, for knowledge sharing as well as practice sharing across borders, and even measurements, back to my point about how businesses is trying to measure this. We need global approaches, but we can also develop really robust regional practices that may take different courses than we might have in a global framework. So agriculture is a great example of this. Soil patterns and soil types are different in North America than in Europe. Agriculture practices are different in North America than in Europe. They're different in the Great Lakes region than in the prairies. So how do we have a bit more of a regional approach to this sequestration model that I'm speaking about? There can be global standards and global frameworks. That's important. There can be shared, say, Canada-US frameworks on soil sequestration and what would be approaches acceptable to, let's say, insetting and offsetting. But is there also the opportunity to go local with this and develop models, let's say, for carbon insets that work in a region like the Great Lakes, or work in a region like the prairies, given that there's way more similarities between Saskatchewan and Iowa than there is between Saskatchewan and Ontario. And a lot of the same companies in the food system are working across border. Say the same in the greenhouse sector in the Great Lakes region, or in the livestock sector, or the horticulture sector in this region. So what might be the cross-border models to, let's say, for example, carbon insetting in the food supply chain that would allow the great companies and food producers and farmers of this basin to work together across borders in ways that they may not work actually within their own country because of distance and geography.
Yeah, very good points. I'm noticing there's a question that's come in. We haven't really talked much about circular economy, but a question from George is on the future of business innovation and sustainable business practices. The EU is ramping up their support of circular economy practices and have implemented a 4-point circular economy action plan. They're even making circular economy practices part of their trading packs. Is RBC taking any actions on this front or involved in any government advocacy on this?
We're working with sectors, and I'll get more deeply into buildings and agriculture on opportunities and action opportunities in this space. But there was an important point in that question about trade restrictions, and there is an enormous risk out there that climate will become the next trade barrier, and we need to be really careful as we invest and try to innovate that we do not discriminate especially in free markets. So how do we ensure that Canada and the US, as I keep stressing, that we do not intentionally or unintentionally diminish the incredibly powerful and progressive trade dynamic that we've all benefited from over the last 50, 60, 70 years. Similarly, how do we ensure that the more complicated trading relationship with Europe is not diminished because of climate considerations, but maybe actually is enhanced so that North America and in Europe, representing and maybe some other like-minded regions and countries in this space, with shared values and goals for economic progress, for inclusion, for sustainability, and for net zero, can pursue those together and not diminish each other's ability to move forward. Now, with respect to circular economy, I want to speak to the action opportunity that we have in these two sectors, and there's actually some interesting opportunities for cross-border collaboration. So, food waste is a quiet climate problem. We probably many of you appreciate the challenge of fugitive emissions that we all generate through the food we throw out or cause to be thrown out on a daily basis. So we can all do better as consumers on that front, but we can also invest more, literally and figuratively, in the innovation that is going on in food waste management. How do this region generates probably way more food waste than we want to admit. How do we share those technologies and even share our food waste or the byproducts of the food waste that can be recycled into the natural economy? Early days in that space, but we're seeing tremendous innovation and ambition out there in our client base. And we ship garbage across our bridges a little more than we probably want to admit. How do we ensure that we're shipping food waste, but for productive, circular economy minded ways that allow it to not go to waste, but to be replanted figuratively, but also literally into the economy. Same with buildings. I was in Europe a few months ago and really struck by the advances made in the building sector with recycled building products. So we all, on both sides of the border, knock down buildings and just throw the bricks and drywall and broken glass into landfill. That is a horrible waste. It's an economic waste as well as an environmental waste. There are fast-growing technological applications to take those waste products from buildings and recycle them into new buildings. How do we work on that in a cross-border way that can be more effective than what's going on in Europe? How do we likewise look to more natural products, wood products, for instance, into buildings that should also be a cross-border opportunity? So all these practical opportunities, important principles and framework agreements are important, but we're also really excited about the action opportunity that we can help and work with our clients, which is what I'm trying to do more and more of, bringing them together and finding ways to not only seize on these opportunities, but to scale them. And the best way we scale, certainly from a Canadian point of view, is to connect into the U.S. market. Frankly, one of the best ways the U.S. market scales is to plug into the really powerful markets here in Canada.
Yeah, that's great. And it's that systems approach that we need to be taking and leading. Thank you so much, John, for your insight and perspectives. We are just over the hour, so I know that we have to unfortunately stop this. We have questions continuing to come in, so but I appreciate you answering the ones that we were able to get to. You really gave us some important insights to leave and ponder on as we continue with the rest of our day. Thank you also to our audience who joined us and contributed with your questions. It was great to have your engagement. Apologies to those that we weren't able to get to your questions. I hope to see you back here next month for our April Business and Sustainability webinar, which will be on April 20th. And we will be looking at the ESG landscape and contextualizing it for the Great Lakes region. So, John, thank you again. Everyone, thank you. And have a great rest of your day.
You as well. Thanks, everyone. Stay safe, stay well.